So we are here in the K-Dome, and we want to welcome Ashley Globiak, and we're going to talk with her about her experience with ketamine. And we're just going to see where this takes us.
One of the reasons why I really wanted to interview Ashley is because I think she's a great example of somebody who has been on an exploration and a path of healing, and how psychedelics have been a part of that.
Psychedelics have really been such a catalyst for my growth and healing, and really everything that inspired me to become a therapist and to be in the mental health industry and in the support space. So it's definitely a foundation for me of what I believe can be so useful for people who have treatment-resistant anxiety, depression, and just really looking for generational lineage healing, looking for personal growth. I love it so very much. So I have such a heart space for it and belief in it. And of course, it's not for everybody, but those who it is for, it's profound and really powerful.
So Ashley, when did you first hear about ketamine? Like, you remember that moment, or like, was there something that drew you to it, or were you like, no way?
I don't think I've ever said no way to a psychedelic before. But with ketamine, I heard about it probably in terms of a therapeutic context, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, just through community members. I was living in the Bay Area, and so connected with a lot of people doing ketamine research and starting to use ketamine in psychotherapy. And I didn't think much about it. I became interested in it, in one, its short duration and just the response I was hearing from people of how amazing and profound their journeys have been. So I just had curiosity more so than anything. And then I actually, had some situations arise in my life that really brought me as a good candidate for the work and the medicine, which I'm happy to talk about as well. I'm sure we'll get to that. But I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for it.
And I think, the part that you said about its short duration, right? It gives it this option. The time itself in the medicine is not that long, so it doesn't take up an entire day, for instance.
Massive. It brings a whole opportunity for a population of people who can't jump on a flight and fly, somewhere for ayahuasca sit, or, find someone for an 8-hour session for MDMA or psilocybin. And so as a mom, it's amazing. As someone who just has a full schedule, it's, it brings in this healing into something that's much more doable and available. I had pretty severe postpartum anxiety when I came into my first ketamine session, and which was, my own individual kind of experiences with what happened after the birth of my son, with some health conditions that we were checking out, and we got cleared at 6 weeks. He graduated from all the doctors and we were all good to go, and I couldn't turn off that anxiety. Along with that, just kind of strong anxiety that was happening, of fear, this vulnerability that you tap into when you're at different stages of your life. For me, this example of being a mom with young children, of the vulnerability of life, and then looking at everything that's happened over this past year, of the collective kind of detoxification of all this darkness really seeping out into, mainstream everything. And so that and feeling, how do I protect my family that's so young, and how do I make sure that I'm doing my part to create a world that leaves them with something? The weight was unbearable, really. I didn't know until after my session what it was like to feel calm. And so I didn't even have a full understanding of how heavy I felt.
Right.
Until after. But it was suffocating me, and it was impacting my ability to connect and to be present with my family, and to do all the things that I know are what you need to do to create the life and the world and everything that I want to have. And so there was a big blockage for me to be able to show up in the way that I knew was not only my whole heart intention, but was the medicine.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashley. Can you talk about So what was it like once the medicine started to take effect for you? Like, what were the things you noticed that changed in your awareness and your sense of self?
There was no sense of self. Maybe that's what happens.
And was that,
Yes.
and that sounds like that was okay. Was that okay?
It was completely okay.
Mm,
I think I
okay.
had the last like cognitive ability to grasp onto my mind was like, I can't believe this is legal. And then I just like went into it because, like MDMA, everything's really fighting for its place on, the FDA approval. And I say that because I've never had, and I've been working, like I said, for, like 13, 15 years with like very, a big practice of ceremony work and different things. And I haven't ever had a medicine deconstruct my ego so quickly. Like it was just gone within minutes. And I remember reaching out for my therapist's hand just because I knew that I would be safe in that space. And I let myself surrender and go into it. And I think it's so important while you find your people that you feel comfortable with and, the sessions to connect with your therapist prior and all of those things make so much more sense to me after doing this work, because you need to be able to trust that whoever's in the space holding you is going to bring you back at the end if you really let yourself go into the medicine. But my ego dissolved within seconds, minutes. There was that point of just a little, that you cross when doing the psychedelic work of that, can I really let myself go there? The fear of, because it really, in those moments, you lose concept of, will I come back from this?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that and like that it was a scary way. It was really beautiful what I was entering. It wasn't a dark space. It was a really beautiful space I was entering. And yet the ego was gone. And so I was able to surrender and let go and to tell myself that it was safe to do so. And I felt the safety to do that. And it was profound. I mean, right away, the music along with the medicine really created this poetry, this art that I was living in during that time or experiencing in that space. And it was all of my issues, all of the heaviness, all of the ways that my mind was conceptualizing the pain and the suffering in the world just opened into this sea of awareness and consciousness and understanding. I saw this like really beautiful colors that matched up with the music beautifully. And it was like this sea of consciousness. And then it kind of integrated or individualized, I should say, into these little droplets. And it looked like I could see the 7 billion little people droplets that were making us up as a collective.
Wow.
And, we always hear that phrase, we create our own reality. And it's something that I believe and have worked on for a long time. But yet this was the first time that I actually experienced that, like in my body, of like seeing it and feeling it, that we really are creating our reality. Prior to coming in, it felt very fear-based and like there weren't many choices in the way that the world is unfolding. It can seemingly seem like the choices and our rights are kind of going away. But this brought in a very different mystical and spiritual experience of that not being the case.
I'm wondering how then you integrate that with your ego. Is there a way to keep both? Do you need to choose, or is there a way that they both can be married to each other and support each other? And in that process of what you find is what you're looking for in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, and I don't think I'm abnormal in this, but I know I'll speak for myself, like it's so easy for me to live in the mind. It's so easy for me to analyze, conceptualize, try to figure things out, and not integrate my heart space. And ketamine brought me directly into the heart. I was here experiencing the same fears, the same troubles, but from this space. And when I came back to on the other side, this energy was so expanded and strong, and this was so quiet still that I could kind of decide who was leading the show. And I think proper placement of, the ego serves the heart and not the other way around. And so, there was a lot of humility that happened for me in ways that, there was some family issues that were up for me in the session, and ways that I was putting myself superior than them, saying if they could just be less crazy, if they could just do a little work, if they could, then it would be easy, then I wouldn't be hurt. And it was this very gentle, like, down in my heart of like, no, like that's putting you up here, them down here. And really in this heart space, every single one of those droplets was equally worthy, me no more so than every single one of them. And that this opportunity for healing and compassion and forgiveness goes equally across the board to even, your mind can say, but not that person, but equally across the board to everybody. And so when I came back with that experience, I could really work with my mind in a different way. It just opened me, and I could give a lot more compassion, and I could talk myself through that, and I could kind of be in relationship with that in a different way.
Mm.
So there's the medicine effect, right? So if we think of SSRIs, right, they have an effect on our physiology, our neurophysiology. And ketamine also has that effect, but I'm wondering how much of the effect was from these experiences you had versus just the simple effect of the medicine.
The journey itself was so profound. I mean, you could integrate that for, a long time, years. There's so many pieces of it too that I've come back to and been able to review and look over. But the aftermath of like my body, once the medicine was out of my system, I was so I mentioned that I had really severe postpartum anxiety for that year. And I tend to run anxious by nature anyway. I've had anxiety issues my whole life. And when I came back from my session, it was the first time, at least in over a year, if not longer, that I came home and I did not experience anxiety in my body.
Wow.
That I came home and I sat down with my family and my children, and I played, and I wasn't fearful. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't concerned.
Mm.
And I was blown away by that, blown away. And that lasted for a few days. And so even with the medicine out, the integration for me was even more so than other medicines I've worked with, profound in that way, in the calmness and the peace I had. And, life comes back, and your body and there is, I know, more neuroplasticity the few days after ketamine. And there is, it's a good time to stay calm and relaxed and keep yourself gentle as much as you can, so that you can really train the body to do that. But life does come back. But what it offered me was a pathway to remember what it feels like to be calm. And so my meditations and my yoga and my breathing actually started working again, where it didn't feel like those tools were working for me. They weren't having the same effect as they did years prior. And so I could find that calm again, doing the things that I had been doing for self-care.
One of the difficulties or the challenges that people bring up with psychedelics, and with ketamine not excluded, and maybe even ketamine more, is this idea that it's short-lived, right? That people have this experience and then they can feel that they don't have anxiety for this period of time, or they don't have depression for this period of time, and then they need more. But I think you bring up a really important point, which is it's that you have that context, you have that perspective of, one, that you realize, wow, I didn't know how anxious I really was, right? I didn't know how much I was holding, because now I see this other perspective. But two, that it's also a place that you have in your body that you can go to, that is a reference point, so that it's not necessarily just because the experience is gone and you're down from the ketamine, that means it's forgotten and it just becomes some experience that you had.
Yeah, not at all in my experience. And this goes across all psychedelic work, I feel, is that this is why the integration they talk about is so important, is because you get these insights of how you can live and how you can feel in your body. I think it's the integration, to me, is no different than any other psychedelic that has a longer lasting experience.
And can you clarify so what was the route of administration for you that experience you talked about?
It was an IM.
So it was a shot. Gotcha. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
What are the things that you noticed right away in the days following about, okay, this I think is related to my ketamine experience and how it's manifesting for me in the world?
Mhm. So much of it showed up with how I could be with my children and not to hold so much fear. So I was able to integrate these messages just by putting them straight into application and being, um, being with my family and being calm and being present and not. I had much more control over invasive thinking. There just was a lot more space. And so I just really supported that space to be there as long as possible by letting it be, by allowing it. And so just to let myself be in a non-linear language state and just be in the creativity and the flow and the art of it felt really important.
Earlier, you mentioned around what came up for you in terms of your family. And I'm wondering what is the, like, how does that impact then your relationships in the world, having known that experience of going from that place of they need to be doing this and this and this to, okay, we're on equal ground. And what is that like? How does that impact your relationships?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's the big one. For them specifically, it just was more of an energetic like space. There's still some interpersonal things happening that make it supportive to hold boundary for.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my judgment of them, completely, and I worked on my judgment for a long time, but like this really grounded me and supported a kind of a reframe, and which really brought in a lot more compassion, a lot more empathy, a lot more prayer for them, a lot more forgiveness and space, a lot more gratitude. So gratitude for what's been offered for me and my path, and a lot more space for them to be in the trauma and the pain that they are in and the suffering that they're in. Really what I was holding in my body felt like it really changed. The anger, the judgment, and I hope for them that it's offered some peace. I was really blown away by its profoundness. And of course, I'm sure there's a long, big spectrum of experiences that all have their different, supports. But yeah, I was in one session. It was big.
And you've done a lot of work beforehand too, so
That's evident.
You come in already with such intuition and knowledge and awareness and emotional consciousness, right? That you have, that you're bringing into it already. So that's.
And so I think it's really important to say that wherever a person is at, whether they've done a lot of personal work as you have done, or whether they're just beginning on that journey, ketamine starts, and actually pretty much any psychedelic starts with where you are. And that's where we begin, and then we move from there. So it's very respectful. These medicines are in general very respectful of the individual, given the right setting. And
it started me right where I needed to be. It opens you up, gives you those little jewels that you can then go find when you're off the medicines, and just builds. And, yes, it's work, but it's better than staying in the dark. Yeah. And so the work, and you find a lot of beautiful people along the path and the work, and, it brings a lot of fruit itself. So yeah, for anyone that's starting wherever you are, like I just would encourage not to be afraid of the work that's ahead, but it's so life-giving.
Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for people who are curious about this in terms of to help prepare themselves? should they decide to embark on a journey like this?
And I feel like, especially with psychedelics, there can sometimes be this overexcitement or, there's kind of like this overexcitement, it's super cool thing to do, or this fear of it. If you kind of go at the right pace, that you'll find the right people who can support you and sit with you, which is really, I was going to say 50% of it, but it might be more so, like set and setting and the people, it might be 98% of it or 100% of it. If you have the wrong environment and the wrong people, you're not going to have, not going to be able to let go. You're not going to have the experience that will be healing for you. I will just say, if you're afraid of the ego destruction, you do return to the couch somehow at the end. And I always feel like there's a humility with psychedelics, or meeting yourself into these deep, deep ways, that the nervousness is okay. And it's really actually a sign, like that, that something big's about to happen, and you honor that, and you're respectful of that, and you take it seriously.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for your insight, for the way that you describe your experience. It's so personal and so beautiful and so vulnerable and so helpful.
And thank you for the work you've done. I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So hi, this is Bruce Poulter again, and with me is
Marcela Ot'alora, and we're here with John Carone. I'm going to ask a few questions about his experience with ketamine. Thank you so much for doing this, John. Appreciate it. I think, one of the things that would be really nice to know would be, one, what your experience has been with it. Like if you were to tell a story about what it was for you.
Yeah, so it's important to know that I haven't taken it in a medical setting. It's been part of self-exploration, typically with a group of friends who we've been exploring these realms for many years. So in some ways I compare it to other psychedelics that I've taken. And I'd say that what's been striking about it for me is how predictable it is, how reliable it is. When doing other plant-based medicine, it's often quite variable. You're not sure what dosage and what effect you're going to have. And in this case, it's for me, it's solid experience of knowing what's going to happen and just getting there right away and having a fairly clear experience. So there's a line that I call the psychedelic line, that you can take various kinds of medicine and get close to that line, but I always have this clear sense of when I'm across the line. Across the line is when I'm in an altered state. All of my ordinary self, all of my ordinary experiences are not there. It's interesting in that the way I think of it is that on that side of the line, it's a whole different reality. And it's symmetrical in the sense that when I'm on ordinary, the side of the line that I might call ordinary, the experiences that I've had and on the other side of the line with medicine, I remember them, but I don't actually have the same. It's just different. It's one thing to remember, it's another thing to experience it. So the ketamine has been just really reliable in terms of taking me to the other side of the line, having a very deep, profound experience. And in some ways, all the psychedelic experiences on the other side of the line are similar. I think what's the characteristic of them is that I'm a different person. I'm experiencing a different kind of reality. And what exactly that is really subjective to everyone. It's not a scientific, not something that you might study or have an objective experience about. I'd say that it's just really, really subjective for each of us. And it's important to understand that when I'm on the other side of that line, I'm working with something that's really deep inside of me. It's real. It's not like, from outside, I have these crazy things going on. And then when I get back to the other side of the line, I'm myself again. It's that when I go on that other side of the line, I experience parts of myself that I don't have access to in normal circumstances. And it's real. Not real in the sense that everything I imagine is actually happening, but it's real in that psychological sense that I'm exploring real thoughts, real feelings that I don't normally have access to. There's a lot more to say about that. Maybe it would take too long to get into the subtleties of it. But one thing I'll just mention is, it's a disassociative. I don't actually know what the neurological action of it is, but it's used as a disassociative. And for many people, they experience it sort of like in a disembodied state. For me, embodiment practice has been something I've been interested in all my life. And so when I go to that place that's disassociated, it's like I am doing everything I know how to do to stay embodied, not to go to that like floating out, floating out in space. I don't have a body anymore. I don't know where I am. It's kind of the opposite. Because it's so disassociative, I'm doing everything I know how to stay in my body and to bring the experience that I'm having into the real world. Of course, I'm a completely different person. There's a completely different set of energies happening. And that's the power of it for me, to challenge myself, to bring those parts of myself into my body, into the world, into my connections with the people that I'm taking medicine with. And it's always I always learn so much from all the medicines. And this one in particular has been a real teacher on who am I? What's the relationship of the inner and the outer? What's the relationship of self and other? What happens when my normal thought processes are not normal anymore? Am I still there? How do I still be there?
So John, how do you answer then that question? When you're on the other side of the line and then you come back, how does that affect your life from that point?
When I first started doing psychedelics, I imagined it as a practice for dying.
Yep.
A lot of people, use that as part of the reasons that they do it. And there was a time, maybe in my 40s, I'm 66 now. In my 40s, I thought, I've got this down. Like I still know what's going to happen, but I kind of I know how to get to that, like floaty state, What I've realized in the last 5 or 7 years is that I'm still scared of dying. And the reason that I'm scared of dying is because the way that it's come back to me, that fear, is the fear of disassociating, the fear of not having a center in which I can be the floaty, guy being calm while he dies. It's like, what happens when that's gone? What happens when there's not that capacity anymore to understand what I'm seeing or know that I'm not speaking, And just for my own exploration, I don't know if this is useful for anyone else, so I'm just reporting my own exploration.
That's what we want.
It's like confronting the fear now that, this is the fear that has arisen in this journey. This fear of being disassociated, this fear of being incapacitated, this fear of, my father died of Alzheimer's, and boy, that is not a way I'm willing to go. It's not a way I'm willing to die. It was very sad, and watching him die, in pieces over 10 years. So it's allowed me to explore that in a controlled way. I know how long it's going to take. I know how long I'm going to be there. I know I'm okay. I know I'm coming back. And that's the way that medicine has always worked for me. It's been a controlled dive into my own fears and my own limits of my sanity or my own capacity to stay coherent. So who am I underneath the capacity to know who I am, underneath my image of myself, got it together kind of dude, what happens when I can't do that anymore? Am I able to be with that? And what does that even mean when that kind of dissociative experience is happening?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not answering your question. I'm just telling you what that question kind of means to me.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because, it's all ineffable, it all can't really be.
And do you feel that when you have that experience, when you come back from that experience, is your life, does it inform your life, your daily life in any way? What do you do with that learning, in other words?
So I've been in my head all my life. Medicine work has always been a bit of a counterweight to that. So the answer isn't I don't have an answer that is an intellectual construct of what I do with that. But I will say that I'm lighter. It's like I've been to a spiritual place that nourishes me and gives me a connection, a depth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, that's the psychedelic experience when it works well, is that you feel God, you feel spirit, you feel connection. That's why we do it. And absolutely, when I come back, I feel that. And I feel like I've been playing with my own energy structures, my own power systems, my own capacity to be present with both, like, the boring details of life, and also like the really, really hard um, aspects of death and suffering and how messed up the world is. Just have more tolerance, more capacity for it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Who would you, in terms of having had those experiences and being kind of embodying them, is there somebody or people that you would think, oh, I think this would be good, this would be good for this group of people, or this would be good in the world because of this, for these reasons? Like, is there anybody that you would recommend it to?
That's a really good question. This work isn't for everyone, and everyone has different medicines that work better for them to do the kind of self-exploration work that I use it for. So people who are doing this work, really deliberately exploring their own consciousness with it, obviously. A little bit further afield from my own personal experience, I know that it's used to work with depression. And I haven't, even though I've had my depression, I've had my own experience of my own personal depression, but I've never used it in that context. Did have a childhood friend who, was my best friend when in high school, and he was depressed. He had chronic untreatable depression, which, I didn't understand. How do you understand that? I mean, I understood my own, but his was so deep that he would go to places and I couldn't understand where he was. And we were close all, 30 years. And he basically was a 30-year suicide. He basically never could pull himself out. He did every treatment there was known. He even tried shock treatment in the last 5 years of his life. I think that came back into vogue. And it wasn't until after he died. He died basically of neglect. He didn't kill himself with anything specific. He killed himself by not being willing to take care of himself. And a neighbor found him in his apartment dead. That kind of thing.
Mm.
It wasn't until after that I heard about ketamine as a treatment for depression. And I just wondered, could that have made a difference?
Right.
When he and I, at times in his life, in my life, when we were at some precipice, we would do psychedelics together because I knew there was some spiritual lesson or some spiritual potential there. And, I think it helped some, but none of it was sustainable. He couldn't turn it into something that changed his life. Maybe this would have helped. I would have definitely loved for him to try the therapy with it. He was such an extreme case. I don't even know how to describe it. Pretty sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds painful.
Yeah, that's what it was. And, the helplessness of it, you try everything and nothing works. So you try everything else and none of that worked. And at some point, you just let go.
Right. Right. Yeah. That question of, could this have been something that would have given him some sense of relief, right?
Yeah.
From that suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for telling that story.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions you want to ask, John?
Is there anybody you think that it's a really bad idea for?
I can't say anything medically. That's not my field. I'll say that, psychedelic medicine is for people who have the resources and the support systems to go to the edge of their normal self.
Yeah.
So, and come back. It's shaman work. It's not something to be taken lightly or imagining that it's a silver bullet for anything. It's, it's
Right.
part of a spiritual path.
Yeah.
And I think the people who do it are self-selecting, and um, the network of friends and organizations and experience and knowledge around it just continues to grow. Watching my nephews and my nieces becoming interested in it and wondering what it is, and being able to give them, my experience of it. I just think they make their own choices. Anyone who's willing to take it seriously, like life and death seriously, and anyone who's not shouldn't do it.
Right.
Gotcha.
And I think, for your nieces and nephews, it's like how valuable to have the experience that you have, right? That you be able to share that.
Yeah.
I did have like one observation, and I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but because you mentioned that in your experience, you really use your resources to stay embodied, right? And a lot of people, I think with ketamine do the opposite, right? They just allow that kind of leaving of their body. And I really appreciate what it is that you're trying to do for yourself individually, of like really actually the experience of being embodied. It's almost like you are trying to bring it into the reality of the world. So it's almost like you're doing the integration work at the same time, because you're starting to, because you're doing it in real time, but you're bringing it into the experience of you in the world, not you in some other plane, even though you are in a non-ordinary state, right? So that it's almost like you're working with integration, and you're working with the experience at the same time, and being very grounded in it. So I just wanted to, it's something that I haven't really heard people talk about and say that they do it with that intention to really bring it into themselves. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, this is the world that we have. It's not somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that eventually that's what we do with it, right? After the experience, then it's like, how do we bring it back into the world? But you're doing that in the experience in real time, which means, I mean, that says a lot about just your knowledge of your body and your knowledge of yourself, of how the resources that you utilize in order to do that. So it really talks about the knowledge that you have of your own being.
Thank you. It's sometimes successful and sometimes not, as you can ask my friends who were there with me as to whether I was, staring at a wall, making crazy gestures, or, having some more coherent looking experience. Not like I know how to do it, but it's my intention. And whenever I do it, I'm always working that intention of bringing it into my body. I've recently discovered that by being blindfolded, it intensifies the whole thing, which is really helpful. So you can use smaller doses. I can use smaller doses, and being blindfolded allows me to be in this underworld without the outside world kind of bringing me back. And at the same time, I'm trying to move in that world. I'm moving my body. I'm often standing, often dancing. That's my form of moving that energy through me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I recommend it to anyone who's got an embodiment practice to try it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, because I was wondering about, because I do know about, I know you as a dancer, and so I was wondering how that discipline relates to ketamine specifically, because ketamine is so in general for people, they can't move. So I'm just wondering about how that was for you.
So I have been a software engineer and a dancer my whole life. And in the software engineering world, you're paid to be disembodied, living in cyberspace, manipulating symbols in a completely disembodied way. And dancing has been my counterweight to that part of me. My attempt to bring the medicine into my body and work at it in my dancer self, you have to see it in contrast to the alternative for me is this extremely heady, disembodied, intellectual self. And I just made a choice when I first started doing medicine that I didn't want it. That wasn't the plane of existence I was interested in. I can do that till the cows come home. What I can't do is access these deeper places. And so that's my work. And yeah, and so dancing is another form of bringing a deeper connection to reality, deeper than mind, deeper than intellectualizing, deeper than theory. And medicine, so then, is complementary to embodiment. And, I mean, lots of people have embodiment practices.
Yeah.
Dancing is mine. But they're kind of akin in way it works me. And I think also it also resonates with this idea I have of what shamans do. I've met a few native shamans, but I grew up Catholic. It's like they kind of just took all that knowledge and just cut themselves off from it. So I'm trying to find that back in my heart and in my life. And I'm curious about what those modalities are. And so I explore them because nobody I knew growing up knew how to do any of that.
Right.
So embodiment for me is the source that I have to get to these deeper places of knowledge. Not everyone does it that way, and I think it's maybe a choice you can make. But if you are, if you don't want to be in your head, more than that, if being in your head feels sterile, feels shallow, feels dead, there's no life in it, not in and of itself, but when it's just a closed system, in and of itself, connected to everything else, it's like a vibrant part of me and everyone. But when it becomes a closed system, for me, I experience it as a real depressed, dead place. And so finding the ways to bring in other energies always goes through the body. And I'm watching various religions like the Buddhists and I don't know, just seems like the religious impulse in the last 10 to 20 years has been embodiment practice. Not like this, let's all stare into, let's all go somewhere else.
Right.
So I think that's a worldwide movement that's underground and is bubbling up, just like the psychedelic movement is, but the embodiment movement of like saying, this is what's real, our connection through our body into our subconscious, into the earth, into connecting with all living things. If that's not a body thing, I don't know what it is.
Very nicely said.
Yes.
Very nicely said,
Yes.
John. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for being with us and talking to us and telling us about your experience. And it's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's quite wonderful. Thanks so much, John.
So sweet to be with you.
Yeah. So here we are again, Bruce Poulter, Marcela Ot'alora, and we are happy to welcome Pierre. And so, and Pierre's been working with, Pierre, how long have you been working with ketamine?
I've been working with ketamine for 3 years now.
Pierre has both experience on both sides of the spectrum in terms of receiving it and being a therapist with it. So we're here to really talk about your experience as both, but mostly as a therapist.
I have a question around that. Like, what is something that you feel like this is why I went into working with ketamine as a therapist? Like, what informed you to focus so much attention to it that you've been doing it for 3 years?
Yeah. Well, I would say before I was doing ketamine work, I was doing a lot of somatic trauma work and was loving it. And when I started exploring ketamine and found out that I could be really putting that together with somatic trauma work and just getting really lovely results quicker. I think the psychedelic world there's a lot of publications where, things are talked about in the sexiest of terms. And I take issue with that because, I think even with the best things on board, the unfolding of a human life is still a complex and long journey.
Right.
And
Yeah,
yet,
thank you.
yeah. And yet I would say that, I feel like I see miracles in my office almost weekly. It's just to get to assist people in a really deep way as they're going through often really unexplored parts of their own psyches
Mhm.
and getting to levels of depth in themselves they've just not accessed before. It's just so deeply satisfying as a therapist.
So can you think of somebody who comes to mind in terms of kind of the issues that they were working with that where ketamine was particularly helpful?
Yeah. Within the last year, a guy started working with me who had some sexual abuse as a child. And when he started working with me, he was 59. And maybe 20 years earlier, he'd done a long stint of psychotherapy, and yet was still very, very much suffering. He really never felt safe dating. And I always wanted to be married, wanted that, and yet it was just way too much to approach.
Mhm.
And from age 9 to 59, he was pretty much numb.
Wow.
And so he and I started doing ketamine work together. I think it was like 7 sessions of ketamine later. We would do a ketamine session one week, and then an integration session,
Mhm.
and then just back and forth. So just that was the cycle for us.
Mhm.
And I think it was like our 7th session of ketamine work. And he was no longer numb.
Wow.
Mm.
Like
How sweet.
50 years of numbness gone.
Right.
So how do you understand that?
To a degree, I'd say for me, it's a deep mystery. The other side of it, I would say, is that, the ketamine dissociates, so he doesn't have to.
Huh.
And it gave his system, which was just sort of locked into a dissociative state, a chance to sort of churn through something that it needed to work through. I'm happy to report that starting early next month, he's going to start getting on dating apps.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's great. I have a question about that in terms of what was the indication to him, to you, that he was no longer numb? Like, how did you know that?
Well, it's funny. We were just talking about this today, so it's great timing. He he said to me that he was in the office at work, and then just like all of a sudden looked up, and there was a sense that it had lifted, like this heavy veil between him and the world was just gone.
How wonderful. What a wonderful experience. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful opportunity for him, right?
Yeah. He gets to reclaim his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Life transforming. Let's see. So how about people where it's been problematic?
Yeah. What I find is that what's problematic is that people are having such a big non-ordinary experience, and you have to be able to report about it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Right.
And also have a capacity to witness yourself having an experience. And I've had some people over the years who, for various reasons, just really weren't able to do that. And they didn't really seem to get much out of it. I had one guy who had a ton of PTSD, but just almost no experience having an internal life. And we would do ketamine sessions together, and I would ask him what was going on, and he would just be like, he just sort of shrug his shoulders, be like, yep, it's a kaleidoscope in here.
Huh.
But there was no meaning making to be done.
Right. But you just said something really important, which is being able to know where people are at. And I think I see that sometimes when we're in, like when we're interviewing people for the study, right? Like, do they have a way to be able to talk about their experience, right? And that is so important for clinicians to know, right? To really know, like, how do I prepare this person, or who do I offer it to, and do I know enough about their history, the way that they describe it, so that this could be a possibility for them or not.
You know what, I really enjoy doing sort of more psycholytic sessions with people. So they're taking lower doses, and they're often able to talk through the experience. You know, I'm not doing IM sessions with people where they're just really getting blasted off. And I guess, you know, my concern would be for people for clinicians that are going to be getting involved mostly with IM work. You know, I think it might be easy to miss that.
Yes.
Quite a bit, because they're going to be having too big of an experience to talk anyway.
And so that's where this whole integration piece is really important, because the ability to articulate about their internal experience is really important in terms of reconfiguring those connections with their history, their family of origin, their day-to-day life, their interactions in the world. So the absent that, it's really, there's not much to work with.
Right, exactly.
You know, then you're just left with the kind of the pharmacological effect of ketamine on a person's neurotransmitter system, right, which, you know, we know it does have an effect, and can be helpful in particular with depression, but it doesn't, it's not the more the nuanced part, of the juicier parts, where it's actually, you're working with identity and working with relationship with self, and work in this kind of emerging self that's trying to appear.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with integration? What have you found that works for you in terms of how you work with a client integrating their experience?
A lot of clients really enjoy an intensive working period where we're doing 1 week on, 1 week off with ketamine. And then for others, you know, they come in maybe once a month, and then there's 3 integration sessions. We're just continuing therapy. For me, the process really looks like, so people have a big experience, and I take notes on my phone the whole time, because I'm also controlling Spotify for the music through the phone. I'm doing all of it through there while we're doing the session. And so when they come in the following week, it's really nice to be able to go over like the pacing of the session and just sort of jog their memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from there, you know, because I work so somatically, right? We're sort of, I like helping people remember different pieces that occurred for them in the session, and sort of anchoring it into their bodies in a somatic way. The fastest way to learn anything is to have an experience. And so, right, you know, we can talk all day, but if they can sense it in their body, it's a more robust neural integration.
Yep. Yeah.
And so, and you know, I think a thing people who work with me hear me say a lot, right, in this kind of work is, it's like they'll have a big opening, and then it's like, right, and now you get to go take this body for a walk, right? Like, you're getting to see, like, who are you in the world from here, you know? And so, and that's like the glorious experiment of all this, right? Is like, yeah, we're gonna do something.
Yeah,
there's gonna be some kind of change for you, and now you get to go see what it's really about.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's such an interesting thing, because that's you know, often people come in with a specific goal in mind, right? Like, I want to work on this. But then what you're actually talking about is the other part, which is the mystery of what actually does spontaneously arise based on their inner wisdom around what's needed in that moment. So how do you find people are with those kind of surprises and mysteries that pop up in addition to what their goals are?
I find that as people get into this work, a trust develops in that.
Yeah.
It's like they have enough experiences of saying, okay, I'm going to go in and we're going to look at this today. And then something else happens.
Right.
And it's useful and it's compelling and it's vivid, and it starts to be a lever upon which, there's some movement in their life. And so at some point, I think most of my clients just, they say like, yep, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm up for it.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. How nice. How nice. Yeah.
And it's so true, right? And because it's like it's that quality of being open to whatever unfolds, which is so important in terms of actually seeing the world and experiencing the world in a different way than what you have historically.
Right. That's it.
It kind of goes back to that question of like, when is somebody ready to do this kind of work? And one is that there is this openness to those things which we don't expect or we don't anticipate.
Right.
Truly, right. And as a deepening in the work happens, as big openings happen, right, new doors open.
Yeah.
Things they never could have anticipated ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Take your feeling for a walk or take your emotion for a walk. And I don't know if you know this, it came from Paul Klee, the artist, who would always say, take a line for a walk. And which was great because it's really, the meaning is actually very similar, which is as you're exploring a drawing, right? Like if you take the line for a walk, you're going to have a felt sense of that line so that your work is going to, so that your spirit is going to fall into that line and is going to create this beautiful piece of art that is actually connected and not something that is devoid of emotion and devoid of energy. And so he would always say, take a line for a walk. And when I learned that in art school, it just stuck with me because it was so beautiful and it's so apropos. So I'm so glad to hear you talking about it. And because I had never heard anybody else use it. And so it's so great.
That's so fun. I think I took it from Joseph Goldstein, the Vipassana teacher, who I remember being on retreat with him many years ago, and him telling us to take our skeletons for a walk, walking meditation.
Yeah, there it is. Wow, that is so great. I love it. Yeah.
Is there another person that comes to mind in terms of your practice that you'd like to talk about their experience?
Yeah. Yep. Man in his mid-30s came to me after a pretty monumental breakup and reported that he'd been depressed since grade school. And so we started doing ketamine work together, and we started approaching the work. And so this is where, the like brute force of ketamine offering some sort of antidepressant effect, and then ketamine as the window deep into someone's psyche to do deep work, I think really diverge. And so with this client, what we were able to do is really start uncovering where this depression came from. And anytime I hear someone say they've been depressed since grade school, I think like, okay, like there's an attachment component to this. Like there's something, like children have so much life force. Like there's just so much life just exploding in children.
Right.
And there's some sort of Faustian bargain kids have to make to get by in their families sometimes, to just put such a lid on that, to either not upset a parent or to make themselves bad so a parent doesn't have to be bad, or to come up, the creative ways in which a child comes up with these ideas about why it's their fault something is or is not happening that is causing them deep pain. And a dissociative depression will do that. That'll just put the lid on all of that life force.
Yeah.
Right. And so we started exploring that with the help of the ketamine, and started just finding this very wounded child piece that just felt very missed on a deeply emotional, loving limbic level.
Oh, how great.
And it was, I think we did maybe a year and a half of ketamine sessions, pretty regularly in the beginning, and then more spaced out over time. And in that time, he went from being inconsolably depressed and really convinced that he was a terrible person, and that's why this relationship had ended, to having just these deep embodied insights that, oh, I was looking for my girlfriend to provide this need for myself. Oh, I can provide that.
Right.
I'm actually responsible for me. I'm actually responsible for this little one. And I'm not this bottomless well I have to try, trick women into filling.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that period of work together, he no longer identified as a depressed person.
Oh, that is so great.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a reason to keep doing this work, right?
No kidding. Yeah. No kidding.
So that speaks to then the next question that comes up around pacing. So how do you pace? So you gave the example of a session, a ketamine session, and then a integrative session, a ketamine session, integrative session. Then you gave this example where it was over a year, where the session's going to spread out. So how do you navigate that territory?
I would say, there's just a way in which I think people's psyches and people's constitutions have sort of different metabolisms. Mm-hmm. Some people digest quickly,
right,
and some people they're just slower, mm-hmm. right? And so you just get a feel for it when you're spending time with someone, and just hearing how they feel after a ketamine session or in the following weeks when I was starting that work with someone. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I wish we were doing one this week. Like, let's go again. Like, we're on to something. Let's do this, And, when there's a lot of energy and there's a strong constitution, like, great, we're going to do that for a period of time. And for others, like, it's nice to be, very measured. And for others still, it's like, whew, that was a big meal. Like, and there's just, and I find there's like, that's just whatever the pacing is, for me, it's immensely trustable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there's always the, like, I think when you're doing this work and you're in that space with people, you can get a feel if someone's just sort of an experience junkie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And so then in that case, great, we can pump the brakes and, like, actually this is about finding all of the little nuance and not just having fireworks,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's great, because then you're not supporting that habitual pattern.
Right.
Well, yeah, it becomes a distraction as opposed to a direction.
Right. And then they're just having experiences. They're not experiencing themselves.
Right. Yeah. And in MDMA, I tend to call that having the trophy that you can put on the mantle, but you just kind of refer to it. I've had this many trophies, but it's not really touching any part of you.
Right. Right. It's all out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the funny paradox with ketamine, because it, in contrast to MDMA, whereas MDMA tends to bring you close to yourself, ketamine seems to give you the distance to actually experience yourself or to witness yourself.
Yeah.
And so both processes are potentially very transformative.
Right.
And so it's, and it may, I was thinking about it in terms of the example you gave. Now my mind went blank. So.
Well, and I think in my mind, sort of, while these are sort of different medicines and have different approaches to working with the psyche and the nervous system, where the connection is in that, right, is in the meaning making.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Is there a self to whom this experience is occurring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there somewhere for all of this experience to be composting?
Yeah.
Or is it just a roller coaster?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that you can go away from or towards, and it actually both directions work.
Right.
Right.
There's still a chance for the composting to occur.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So anything else that you'd like us to know, or you'd like people to know about ketamine or your experience with it?
Hmm. Hmm. I think, to sort of reiterate what I was saying a little earlier of just, I think all of the psychedelic medicines are talked about in extremely sexy terms. And I think while there can be really incredible transformation compared to regular therapy quite quickly, the heart of this is, in my mind, the bravery and the willingness of the participant to really be with their experience.
Yeah.
And it's such I think it's such a compelling and beautiful journey. I think for anyone who's willing to take the journey. And it's my deep wish that this and MDMA and more things become available for people to go on these journeys to discover their depth and beauty more and more so.
Yeah.
Yeah, nicely said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Thank you so much, Pierre. We really
Thank
appreciate you, and I'm sure the people in the playa will really enjoy listening to you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.